He looked like a quiet man, polite, awkward, just another face in the crowd. He worked a regular job. He smiled at neighbors. But behind the locked door of apartment 213 in Milwaukee, Jeffrey Dahmer was doing something far beyond anyone's worst nightmare. 17 men missing. Over just a few years, they vanished one by one. Most were young, poor, and forgotten by the system. When the police finally broke into his apartment in 1991, what they found wasn't just disturbing, it was unbelievable. Inside the fridge, a human head neatly stored. On the counter, a heart ready to be eaten. The freezer held multiple bags of body parts, and in the corner of the room stood a 57-gallon blue plastic barrel, filled with acid, slowly dissolving the remains of more victims. This wasn't just a scene of death, it was a workshop of horror, with Polaroids, tools, and trophies. A place where obsession and murder met science and ritual. He didn't just want to kill, he wanted to keep them, control them, turn them into something that would never leave. They called him many things: a cannibal, a necrophile, a monster. But even those words fall short, because what Dahmer really wanted, the truth beneath all the gore and headlines, is something no court could sentence, no documentary could fully capture. He was trying to build the perfect companion, one who would never leave, one he could keep forever. This story isn't just about death, it's about loneliness, power, and a need so deep it turned into one of the most twisted murder cases in American history. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is not just a crime story. It's a dive into a mind no one fully understood. And the terrifying part? He almost got away with it. Jeffrey Dahmer was born in 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. On the outside, he seemed like just another kid. But early on, there were signs something wasn't right. He was a quiet child, often distant, and found it hard to connect with others. By the time he was in elementary school, Dahmer had developed a disturbing interest: dead animals. He would collect roadkill, store it in jars, and dissect them in the backyard. To some, it was just curiosity. But to Dahmer, it was the start of something far darker. His home life didn't help. Dahmer's parents fought constantly. His father was strict and cold, and his mother battled mental illness. When they finally divorced, it broke what little stability he had. By the time he was 14, Dahmer had already begun drinking heavily, hiding alcohol in his locker at school. Teachers noticed. No one stepped in. At 18, Dahmer crossed the line from thought to action. He picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks, invited him home, and when Hicks tried to leave, Dahmer bludgeoned him with a dumbbell. After the murder, he did something even more chilling. He dismembered the body, dissolved parts in acid, and scattered the remains. It was methodical, cold, and then nothing. Dahmer didn't kill again for 9 years. He joined the army, moved around, tried to live a normal life, and somehow he did. For nearly a decade, the monster inside him went quiet. He lived in the world, unseen, unsuspected. But what kind of person kills once and then waits almost a decade? That silence was not healing. It was hibernation, a monster waiting for the right moment to rise again. So what woke Jeffrey Dahmer's darkness after all those years? And why, when it came back, did it grow even more brutal? In the late 1980s, something in Jeffrey Dahmer cracked wide open. The quiet, awkward man who once hid his darkness for years began slipping into places where no one asked too many questions. The gay bars of Milwaukee. But Dahmer wasn't just looking for companionship. He was looking for complete control. He wanted bodies that wouldn't leave. He started bringing men home, young, vulnerable, mostly men of color. He would drug them first, slipping sedatives into their drinks. Then he would strangle them, quietly, methodically. And once they were dead, he didn't let them go. He kept body parts in his fridge, skulls on shelves, hearts in the freezer. These weren't trophies, they were company. Then came the twist. He didn't always want them dead. Dahmer began experimenting. He wanted his victims alive, but under his total control. He drilled holes into their skulls, poured acid or boiling water inside. He was trying to make living zombies, people with a heartbeat, but no will, just obedience. The horror went unnoticed. Police ignored calls. Neighbors complained about smells, screams, strange noises, but nothing happened. The most shocking moment came in 1991, when 14-year-old Conrek Synthosamphone escaped Dahmer's apartment, bleeding and confused. Neighbors called the police. They found the boy, and Dahmer claimed he was his boyfriend. The officers, laughing, walked him right back inside. Hours later, he was dead. His skull would be found in Dahmer's apartment. These were not crimes of impulse. They were planned, practiced, perfected. Dahmer didn't just kill. He studied how to erase free will. Not out of hate, but fear. He didn't want his victims to leave. He couldn't bear loneliness. What drove a man to such quiet cruelty? Why wasn't murder enough? Why did Dahmer need his victims to be alive, but hollow, silent shells that could never say no? Apartment 213 looked normal from the outside, just another unit in a quiet Milwaukee complex. But inside, Jeffrey Dahmer had built a hidden world, one built not on rage, but on ritual. His crimes weren't just about death, they were about possession. When Dahmer killed, he didn't dispose, he collected. Skulls were carefully cleaned and stacked. Internal organs, hearts, livers, kidneys, were labeled and stored in the fridge. Hands, bones, and genitals were tucked away in drawers. Victims weren't lost to time. They were preserved, as if he was trying to freeze the moment forever. Dahmer posed his victims like statues. He photographed their bodies at each stage, alive, unconscious, dead, and dismembered. These weren't souvenirs, they were attempts to pause abandonment, to keep someone close, even if lifeless. When asked why, Dahmer's answer was haunting in its simplicity. I didn't want them to leave. But what he called loneliness was something far darker. He didn't crave company, he craved complete control. Love to Dahmer meant silence, stillness, total submission. And then came the most disturbing detail of all, the shrine. In his bedroom, Dahmer was constructing an altar, a black table, candles, human bones placed in symmetrical lines. He planned to sit before it and meditate, surrounded by the remains of the people he'd taken. He believed it would give him power, even transformation. It wasn't about murder anymore, it was about meaning. But fate interrupted him. On July 22nd, 1991, a man named Tracy Edwards escaped Dahmer's apartment. He ran, still handcuffed, down the street and flagged down police. When officers entered the apartment, they were hit with a smell of rot and chemicals. Then they opened the fridge. Inside, a human head. Drawers filled with Polaroids. Bones under the bed. Acid drums in the corner. A full human torso in the freezer. Dahmer wasn't just killing, he was creating something. But what? What did police uncover that revealed the disturbing belief system behind it all? And the terrifying reason Dahmer said he had to keep going? Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't just killing, he was constructing. In interviews, he admitted he had a plan. He wanted a room, a private space where he could feel at peace. But this wasn't peace in any normal sense. It was a shrine, a throne, a place where the line between death and worship collapsed. He kept certain organs, hearts, livers, biceps, not out of cruelty, but because he believed they held power. He said that eating or storing them made him feel connected to his victims, that the physical form gave him access to something deeper, ownership of their spirit, their presence. Dahmer was attempting a twisted form of ritual magic. The photos recovered from his apartment included blueprints, sketches of a darkened room lined with bones lit by black candles, the centerpiece a throne made of skulls, velvet curtains, mirrors, a place not just for memory, but for dominion. He wasn't searching for love. He was obsessed with obedience, a partner he could mold, freeze, control. His infamous zombie experiments, where he drilled into skulls and poured acid into brains, weren't meant to kill. They were failed attempts at creating a living puppet, someone conscious but muted, alive but empty. And all along, he told people. He spoke of urges, he confessed to fantasies, he shared details with parole officers and therapists, but no one connected the dots or wanted to. The monster wasn't hiding. He was speaking, and no one listened. So, what became of the man who tried to make people his forever? Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested in July 1991. In court, he pleaded guilty to 15 murders, emotionless, composed, and disturbingly candid. The judge handed down 15 life sentences, totaling over 900 years behind bars. But justice for many still felt unfinished. Then came November 28, 1994. Inside Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, Dahmer was assigned routine janitorial duty with 2 other inmates. Minutes later, guards found him bludgeoned to death in a prison bathroom, beaten with a metal bar, his skull crushed, his body left bleeding on the floor. The The man who killed him, fellow inmate Christopher Scarver, claimed he was following God's will. In interviews, Scarver said Dahmer would mock other inmates with twisted jokes about his crimes, and that he just couldn't take it anymore. In a haunting twist, Dahmer had told his family he believed he'd be killed in prison, and yet he never fought back. According to guards, he didn't scream, he didn't beg, he accepted it. Some say he even welcomed it. "I deserve death," he once said during a prison interview. He never showed tears, never showed rage, just a cold, distant calm. He read the Bible, attended church in prison, told people he'd found God. But to the families of the victims, that peace felt unearned and unreal. Even after death, fear lingered. Scientists removed his brain, hoping to study it for clues. Was it a tumor, a chemical imbalance, something broken? No answers came. Eventually, his body and brain were cremated. No gravestone, no marker, just ash. He was gone, but the questions weren't. Could he have been stopped? Were the signs missed or ignored? And what do we make of a man who committed such evil without hate? In the end, what did we really learn from Jeffrey Dahmer? Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't just a killer. He wasn't driven by rage or chaos. He was meticulous, intentional, focused on one terrifying goal: to create eternal obedience. Not just death, but permanent control. He didn't want partners, he wanted possessions. People who would never leave because they no longer had the will to. He told police exactly what he was trying to do. The photos, the altar, the preserved skulls, they weren't trophies. They were tools in a ritual of dominion. He wasn't insane. Psychologists confirmed it. He understood right from wrong, and he chose wrong over and over with disturbing clarity. That's the most horrifying realization. Dahmer didn't snap. He planned. From luring victims, to experimenting on their brains, to storing their remains like museum pieces, he wanted a shrine, a black velvet room lit by candles and human bones, a space where he could be God. And yet, he didn't stand out. He didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He was soft-spoken, awkward, polite, the kind of neighbor who smiled and kept to himself, the kind you forget. That was the real nightmare. The monster wasn't hiding under the bed. He was living upstairs. He was the quiet man next door. His story forces a twist in how we think about evil. It doesn't always wear a mask. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it knocks politely, or laughs at the corner bar, or invites you in for a beer. 17 young men lost their lives. Their families lost brothers, sons, futures, and society gained a dark lesson. Evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Dahmer became a name, a warning, a horror story told over and over. But underneath the label of cannibal, killer, monster, was still just a man. And that is what makes it all the more terrifying. He wasn't fiction. He wasn't folklore. He was real. And he lived among us. The story of Jeffrey Dahmer didn't end with his death. It lingers in the haunting court testimonies, in the silent grief of families, and in the images that investigators have never fully released to the public. His apartment may be gone, his remains cremated, but the legacy of what he did still echoes. Because this wasn't a horror movie, it was real. 17 lives stolen in silence. Victims who had names, families, futures, all reduced to bones, photos, and freezer bags. The pain never ended for their loved ones. For them, justice wasn't enough. It never could be. And that's what makes Dahmer's case so chilling. He wasn't a snarling monster. He didn't live in the shadows. He smiled at neighbors, shook hands with police, bought groceries like anyone else. Evil, in this case, wore a quiet face. Polite, withdrawn, ordinary. And maybe that's the lesson. That darkness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it moves next door. Sometimes it even shakes your hand. So while the case is closed, the question remains. Could it happen again? That's why we tell these stories. Not to glorify the killer, but to remember the victims, to recognize the warning signs, and to remind ourselves of the terrifying fragility between human and monster. If this story left you cold or curious, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still thinks monsters only live in movies. And here's a question for you. What do you think would have happened if Dahmer had finished his shrine? Would he have stopped or gone further? Drop your theory in the comments. Let's talk about it.